Base 60 math was used by the mathematically advanced antediluvian world. This is a fact, and it was not an arbitrary decision by our ancestors. I will prove to you that the underlying mathematics and geometry of the universe are rooted and grounded in the number 6. To review what I covered in previous posts about our English measuring system, we start with 1 inch. A span is 6 inches, 6 times 1. A foot is 2 spans or 12 inches, 6 times 2. A yard is 36 inches or 3 feet or 6 spans, 6 times 6. A mile is 5,280 feet, which is 60 feet times 88. We still use the units of time from the base 60 system to this day also. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 6 times 4. 30 days in a month, 6 times 5, and previously there were exactly 360 days, 60 times 6 in a year. The 360-day year was the reason the circle was determined to be divided into 360 degrees, 1 degree for each day of the orbit of the Earth, 360 degrees total in a circle. Now, to prove that those increments were not decided upon arbitrarily, let's examine the measurement of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. You will see the creator of the universe used that scale, and our ancestors derived the measurements mathematically from the creation. As we get further into this, you will be astounded when you realize that it does not matter whether you use the English system of measuring, or the French metric system, or the ancient cubit. They all work the same. The radius of the Earth is 3,960 miles. That is 60 times 66. The diameter of the Earth is 7,920 miles. That is 60 times 66 times 2. The diameter of the Moon is 2,160 miles. That is 60 times 6 times 6. The radius of the Moon is 1,080 miles. That is 60 times 6 times 3. The radius of the Sun is 432,000 miles. That is 60 times 60 times 60 times 2. The diameter of the Sun is 864,000 miles. That is 60 times 60 times 60 times 4. Mankind had no say in the size of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. The scales was set by God. Our antediluvian ancestors, with their keen intellect and long lifespans, understood by observation that the root number of the universe is 6. They were far more advanced in mathematics than we are today. The universe reveals multiples of 6 and 60 in its design. The math of the universe also declares the number 7 as its architect. There are countless examples in the physical universe. But getting back to planet Earth and mankind, I will use one of the most well-known, documented, and investigated examples of base 60 math in the antediluvian world, the pyramids of Giza. Let's look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the oldest works of architecture and engineering in the world, yet it contains no less than 10 highly advanced mathematic constants in the design. Some of these constants we just rediscovered in the 20th century. I say rediscovered because our ancestors were intimately acquainted with these mathematical constants. We are just now, some 5,000 years later, figuring them out. We will look at these mathematic constants first. After that, we will look at the scale of the building as an exact statement of the measurements of the Earth. The following mathematical constants and contained in the Great Pyramid of Giza: the square root of 2, the square root of 3, the square root of 5, the square root of 6, pi, phi, also known as the golden ratio, also known as Euler's number, Euler's constant, t, or Fibonacci constant, and b sub 2, or Brun's constant. As you can see from the chart, many of these constants were not discovered until the last 300 or 400 years, yet they are expressed in the design of the pyramid built before the flood, over 4,500 years ago. In the short video below by Alan Green of tobeornotttobe.org, Alan shows you all of these math constants plus a couple more in the Great Pyramid. Alan has done a marvelous job of making difficult material easy to understand.
In 1859, John Taylor published The Great Pyramid. Why was it built, and who built it? He was the first person to notice that the very simple 14:11 ratio inherent in the basic proportions of the pyramid revealed to an extraordinary degree of accuracy pi and phi. In the century and a half since Taylor launched this most significant quest to prove that the Giza builders had prior knowledge of higher mathematics, Egyptologists still deny there's anything more than coincidence involved. But in a moment, you're going to see for the first time that this seventh wonder of the ancient world has no less than 12 of the most important mathematical constants embedded within its basic proportions. The diagonal, the base, the half base, the side slope, the height, and the corner slope. Now I'm using just the basic units generally acknowledged to be the original measurements the builders used in royal cubits. 220 half base, 440 base, 280 height. With these basic numbers, the side angle is inevitably 51.843, and these other measurements all follow simply by applying Pythagorean theory. Now, don't panic. I'm well aware that many people have the following reaction when confronted with mathematics. But I'm going to spare you for now. Everything you're going to see is documented in minute detail on a dedicated YouTube channel, so the true nerds amongst us can triple-check the math to their heart's content. The rest of us can relax, just enjoy the ride. So let's get into it. Here's the square root of 2. It's the only one that doesn't involve any proportion beyond the base, so by definition it's 100% accurate. Here's where we find pi. If we add these two diagonals, we get the Euler-Mascheroni constant. It wasn't discovered until 1734. What happens when you invert that? Square root of 3. This is square root of 6, square root of 5. Here's Brun's constant, not discovered until 1919, hugely significant in the field of prime numbers. Here's the Fibonacci constant, derived from a variant of the Fibonacci series. Here's the inverse of the golden ratio, phi minus 1. And here's phi itself from the Fibonacci series. Now if we take the base and then divide by that phi, we get e times 100, close to 4 decimal places. And finally, here's e minus 1. Utterly unsuspected today of being of any special importance, yet to our purpose right now, it's the most profoundly impactful of all 12. Why? Well, here are the two proportions that produced the e minus 1 ratio, followed by another sequence of proportions in purple. You don't have to do the math, just hold your breath, because the ratios of these proportions are to an incredible 2 5,000ths of a foot and 4 5,000ths of a meter. Staggering. So the three most prominent units of measure are found intimately connected to each other in the basic proportions of the pyramid, and in the same place where we found the 12 math constants. Let's put this into perspective on a timeline from the beginning of creation all the way up to the present day. Not to scale, of course, but you get the idea. Here's where Orthodox Egyptology states that the pyramid was built, 4th dynasty, and here's where some of us believe is more realistic, around 13,500 years ago. I want you to ask yourself, which came first, the constants or the pyramid? Well, the very definition of a constant is that it stays the same for all time, right? At the moment creation comes into being, there's duality. The constants must exist. Is the circle's circumference ever going to change in relation to its diameter? No. Okay, the constants came first. So, is it reasonable to conclude the pyramid might have been built precisely as it is in order to preserve knowledge of these important mathematical building blocks of creation? No, not at all, says Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Mankind hadn't even invented the wheel yet, so the Egyptians couldn't possibly have known pi. It's just
sheer luck.
Well, okay, let's grant them that argument. The angle may have been chosen purely by accident, but apparently the blueprint for the three major units of measure, the imperial foot, the royal cubit, and the French meter, is inherent, embedded in the very same proportions. Well, let's ask the same chicken and egg question. Which came first, the units of measure or the pyramid? Now, this is a little trickier. The constants have to precede everything else, but the way in which we measure those constants, that's surely arbitrary. A decision made at some point along the timeline by man himself, no? Well, we know from observation that the pyramid was certainly built with knowledge of the royal cubit, so yes, that unit of measure predates the pyramid. But as we well know, feet came much later, about here, and the meter here. And of course, Egyptologists fight relentlessly over this. They're constrained to answer that the foot and meter came after to preserve their status quo. So what to make of the fact they're all here to such an extraordinary precision? Same answer from the Orthodox camp.
Luck.
But is it really? We need to think about this some more. If we reduce the green, foot, to unity, the red measures 1.718 feet. This is actually the structure of Euler's number E, the ratio 1 to 1.718. And so the cubit is E minus 1. This is the relationship between foot and cubit. Jacob Bernoulli, in 1683, working on compound interest, discovered this formula, the same one that banks use today to calculate the interest we owe on our credit cards. 1 is the amount that we borrow, and if we're compounding at 100% interest continuously, the maximum possible owed on a loan of $1 converges to 1.718, and the total is E, 2.718, and that's the total owed to the bank. This rate of growth is inherently built into creation. It's the natural base of logarithms. The incredible thing is, this implies the foot is synonymous with the principle, the original unity, what we start with. And the cubit, the interest or growth. And it doesn't only apply to banking. It shows up in calculus, probability theory. It's used to predict population growth, or the rate of spread of an epidemic. Its inverse is the rate of radioactive decay. It's everywhere. Newton found the same thing in 1669 with this infinite series of what's called reciprocal factorials. They're on the bottom with the exclamation points. They simply mean 1, 2 times 1, 3 times 2 times 1, etc. to infinity. And this part of the series converges to 1.718, and there's the 1 unity preceding it, exactly as in Bernoulli's formula. Haven't we always been taught that the foot was based on the average size of a human foot and the cubit on the distance from the point of the index finger to the elbow? And doesn't such an arbitrary choice sound bizarrely unscientific? Especially now that we see beyond doubt they're both based on this mathematically significant relationship, the universal constant of E. So what about the meter? By reducing it by the same ratio to match the unity foot, we discover this meter is the equivalent of 3.281 feet. Now, is there any mathematical connection between it and the cubit? Well, the French derived it from 1/10,000,000th part of the meridian of the polar circumference. At least that's based on the science of geodesy, measuring the actual size of the Earth by the inherent geometry of circles. Perhaps we should look at other reliable, consistent attributes of our planet, like the 12 hours of day and the 12 hours of night that mark the Earth's rotation, or the 12-month seasons of its yearly revolution of the Sun, which gives rise to the 12-month zodiac signs of the constellations, which themselves embody a retrograde pattern far more mysterious to track, but which the ancient Vedic scriptures declare is based on a series of seasons, if you will, that take our planet through an inconceivably long cycle in multiple increments of 1,200 years each for the Iron Age, 2 times 1,200 each for the Bronze, 3 times 1,200 each for the Silver Age, 4 times 1,200 each for the Golden Age, and which altogether constitutes Plato's great year. Cycle of 12,000 years ascending and 12,000 years descending. The question is, do we see a reflection of such patterns anywhere here in the meter-cubit relationship? Well, if we take a circle of radius 1 meter, its circumference is 12 cubits. So 1 cubit is exactly this portion of the arc, 1/6 of a slice of pi, or pi over 6, just the way we measure angles in radians. Pi over 6 is 0.5236. If we take the cubit in feet and divide by the meter in feet, it's precisely the same. Beautiful, yes? Let's take the whole thing now. Make foot, cubit, meter the radius of our circle. The circumference now is 12 pi feet. That's for an astounding 99.9993% accuracy. Or look at just cubic meter as the radius. Let's stretch this here. That's now 10 pi feet circumference. In fact, when we make the cubit be the perfect e minus 1 meter, the perfect pi over 6, which works out to this little formula here, and the foot is perfect unity, the inherent mathematical perfection is in there between foot and cubit e, between cubit and meter pi, and it produces this. Cubit meter is exactly 5 feet, all but for a minuscule 0.00004 feet. That's to an incredible accuracy of 2/50,000th of a foot. To put that into perspective, it's roughly the size of a human red blood cell. And of course that means that all three combined is 6 feet. We have to really wrap our minds around this or we can easily miss it. The units of measure, the very constructs with which we've defined the constants over thousands of years in completely different cultures, turn out to be a constant themselves. 3 in 1, and directly connected to 12, there's that number again, of the world's most important constants, carved in stone, immortalized next to each other in the Great Pyramid. It rightfully deserves the name Universal Constant of Measure. And it's not surprising it has remained unknown for so long because, think about it, the world has used a combination of imperial units, feet, and the French metric system for over 2 centuries. No one saw the connection between 1 foot and 3.281 feet. Because the missing link, where the pure mathematical connection to each resides, is the biblical royal cubit, which we haven't used for millennia. It begins to look as though the units of measure are maybe as eternal as the constants themselves. So was the Great Pyramid built with prior knowledge of this mystical fact? Well, the mathematical precision of the pyramid can't be argued away as sheer luck anymore, so the Egyptologists will be forced to revert to their last bastion of retreat, their mantra of denial. Evolution doesn't happen in predictable cycles like all the other time-related patterns. It's linear. Ape, caveman, to brilliant us. It's simply not possible for the pyramid to be older than stated, because how could inferior man ever even build it? But that's where they're trapped, because exactly, how could such a sublime, perfect repository of ancient wisdom be created by, well, dumb and dumber? As for the monkeys, I was Davy Jones's musical director for 12 years and I never once saw him whip out a slide rule. And modern man? Forget it. We couldn't do this. We still today don't know the existence of this foot, cubit, meter connection. So where does that leave us? No one on this timeline could have done it. The only alternative is builders of a far superior intelligence at a time that we have absolutely no knowledge of. Prehistory. Yet still, this being the only possible solution, it will, as always, be vehemently resisted. It is indeed difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Upton Sinclair. We have again, like so many truth seekers on this ancient knowledge quest, proven prior knowledge, and it will not be accepted. Because there is still that infinitesimally slim possibility that it is all, well, say it with me,
Sheer luck.
the most incredible coincidence. And why? Because there's no physical, tangible proof. A parchment, a document, something stating specifically every single detail of all that you've just seen. If we had that, the very existence of such a holy grail of a document could mean only one thing: that the otherwise unknowable knowledge it contained had been passed down from prehistory by human transmission, secretly guarded and zealously protected over countless centuries. It's just plain common sense. Such beings of superior intelligence knew that by building the Great Pyramid, its very presence would guarantee that great minds in the future would eventually focus on it accordingly and retrieve its deepest messages. But they'd also use every other means at their disposal to transmit the knowledge through secret initiatory ritual as an additional safety net, another conduit to assure survival of the sacred wisdom. Does it matter what name they went by? Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Freemasons? Maybe we will never know the precise intricacies of the transmission, but we know enough to realize it would have been attempted. The question is, did it get through? Because if so, the discovery of just one physical document detailing such knowledge would be the ultimate incontestable proof. Game over. Well, such a document does exist. It is irrefutably genuine. I have worked for over 6 years with the most accurate digital copies of this document. In fact, everything you have seen in this presentation was discovered first in the document. It will be revealed at the 2016 Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge.
Whether the pyramids of Giza are 4,500 years old, the youngest accepted date of construction, or if they are even older, the mathematics inherent in the design is sophisticated. Are they just coincidences, or did the architect have advanced mathematical knowledge? The next video will prove the architect knew what he was building. The Great Pyramid of Giza is a mathematical representation of the Earth on a scale of 1 to 43,200. Please note that 43,200 is a multiple of 60, 60 times 60 times 12, or 60 squared times 12. Also, please understand the longitude and latitude system we use today is a base 60 system. The GPS we use to navigate with to this day is the same system the builders of the Great Pyramid of Giza used to scale the pyramid to exactly 1/4 of 1 minute of latitude and longitude at the Earth's equator. In other words, if you take 15 seconds of latitude at the Earth's equator, that measurement east to west is exactly the same as the southern side, east to west, length of the pyramid. If you take 15 seconds of longitude at the Earth's equator, that measurement north to south is exactly the same as the east and west side length, running north to south of the pyramid. The scale is so precise that it is not a perfect rectangle because longitudinal lines converge as you go north. So the north side of the pyramid is slightly shorter than the south side by exactly the proportions you would expect. There is no doubt that the builders of the pyramids were using base 60 mathematics. The following video will provide amazing information about the Earth contained in the design of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
The history of man may be far longer and stranger than we think. The Great Pyramid may indeed not fit in with what we believe about the past and the nature of the world. Thousands of years ago, someone measured the Earth with remarkable accuracy and recorded this information in the dimensions of the largest and possibly the oldest stone building on the planet, William R. Fix. J.H. Cole in 1925 did what's considered to be the definitive survey of the Great Pyramid. He was a professional surveyor who did a very meticulous survey after they had just cleared away all of the rubble, and he had access to it. He did it under contract to the government of Egypt. The numbers that I'm about to show you here are mostly derived from his survey. So what we have here is here's some of the original casing stones, and they sit on what's called a socle, which is this base, which was measured to be 55 centimeters in thickness. And of course, you got to bear in mind that this original slope casing stone it wasn't stepped like that originally. It was a smooth profile. And okay, so here you have, of course, here you see that the casing stones were damaged by the rubble falling down, but enough of them were still intact that one could make this accurate determination of the original angle. Here's the socle, which is 55 centimeters thick, and it sits directly on bedrock. So it actually, what it does is it creates two ways that one could measure the height of the pyramid, either with or without the socle. There's also two ways of measuring the base. This is a reconstruction from 1991 work on pharaonic stonemasonry. And this shows that outside the corners, which was the core masonry, there are these sockets. And I found one picture showing a socket. This is showing one of the sockets that's still there, that sits outside the core masonry. But based on those sockets, they were able to reconstruct what the original base of the pyramid would have looked like. So here would have been the 51 degrees, 51 minutes, coming down, sitting on the 55 centimeter thick socle here, like this. Well, what this did was it gave two ways of measuring the perimeter of the pyramid's base. One could be measured from this point up on top of the socle. The other could be measured from down here that included the socle. So what you ended up with was two ways of measuring the pyramid's base. Well, which one was the correct one? Well, they were both correct. I think that they were actually intending to embody in there that there were two ways of measuring the pyramid's base. So what we have is the length of the base on the socle, which is the shorter of the two up there. It was varied from side to side. You'll notice 755 at the smallest to 756 just over at the largest. So there was some variation. There was probably a reason for that variation, actually, but we won't get into that because it just gets too technical for what we're talking about today. But the total of those measured around the four sides would be 3,023.139 feet. If you're taking notes, that'd be a good number to write down. Okay, so now let's see what the measure is around that includes the socle, or the base. And we see that each side is roughly 5 feet longer, 760 to 761. Each side, again, is a little different, but we get a total of 3,043.433 feet. Okay, so I'm going to, over here, I'm going to write down a few numbers that we saw through our radius of the moon, diameter of the moon, radius of the sun, diameter of the sun, number of seconds in a day would be 43,200. Number of seconds in a half a day, number of seconds in a full day, 86,400. What were some of our more other numbers? Oh yeah, 1440 was one, 7920. Diameter of the earth, just so they're up there in front of you, we can refer to them as we go on here. All right. So here is profile, the Great Pyramid with a 51 degree, 51 minute angle. To make it easy, I've just rounded off the numbers, 481 feet in height. That would be not including the socle, the base. 755.85, I just picked one to use. And there's our 51 degree, 51 minute angle. And we find that when we measure it this way, it turns out to be almost exactly 11/7. There's some other interesting geometry going on related to the golden section, which I don't intend to get into today because it makes more sense if you're actually studying sacred geometry and you're familiar and you've made these drawings, because in a sacred geometry class, just like in the old Pythagorean and Platonic lodges, we draw, and then we eventually build models. And that's the way to really get familiar with this and get these numbers as part of your consciousness. So I'm not going to get into the connection with the golden section today. When we measure including the socle, this becomes our height, 482.7575 feet, and the base, 760.9 feet. Okay, those are the numbers we're going to look at for a second here now. if we look at these are various estimates. We're looking at this one right here, the coal height estimate plus the sockle at 21.6 inches gives a total of the height above bedrock of 482.7575 feet. So now we're going to go back to the Earth so we can see how these numbers link the two. We take 1 square degree of latitude and longitude at the equator. Pretend we're standing at the equator. Okay, we know that the polar radius now is 13 miles less than the equatorial radius. So what that means is that the circle this way is shorter than the circle. The biggest circle that defines the Earth is the equatorial circle. So a degree of measure on the equator is going to be the biggest, the longest of any degree we measure anywhere on the Earth, the equator. Okay, the north-south is going to be a little bit shorter. And you'll notice right there, we've got 68.7 miles north to south and 69.17 east to west. So it's not a perfectly square unit, is it? It's a little bit distorted. Well, that distortion is totally significant because it's that distortion that is a measure of the Earth's departure from being a perfect sphere. And it's that departure of a perfect sphere that is very significant to us, because without that, again, Earth's orbital stability would be non-existent. Okay, so we're going to divide this up a little bit. If we take this square degree of latitude north to south, longitude east to west, and we look very carefully down in the lower right-hand corner, you're going to see something, a little square. You see that little square? That represents 1 minute, 1/60th of the degree this way, 1/60th of the degree this way. So that's 1 minute of latitude and longitude, all right? We're going to take a closer look at that, and we will see that 1 minute then is 6,045.881 north to south, 6,087 east to west, which is what we expect. The east-west should be a little bit longer, and that's 1 square minute of latitude and longitude. Okay, now we're going to divide each of those lengths into 2. We're going to divide our square minute into 1/4 sections. And here's what I want you to notice. When we do that, we take 1/4 of a square minute of latitude and longitude. Look at our dimension east to west, and look at our dimension north to south. And look at these two numbers. In fact, here's an accurate calculation. We take the 482.755 feet, which is the height, and what we discover is that if we multiply that by the number 43,200, which is one of our sacred numbers that we've seen right there, 43,200, it shows up in the Vedas and the Sumerian king lists, etc., etc. If we multiply the height of the pyramid by that number, this is what we come out with, 3,949.83 miles. And notice the difference between the pyramid, which I call the standard polar radius, and World Grid System 72 is only 313 feet over the entire size of the Earth. So we have essentially the pyramid being a scale model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, at a scale of 43,200 to 1. If we take the pyramid, enlarge it by 43,200, its height, including the sockle, now becomes the polar radius of the Earth within 300 feet of our satellite surveys. And the two measures of the base are exactly the difference between the east-west difference and the north-south difference at a square minute at the equator. Now, the skeptic and the reductionist would dismiss this and say, it's just a coincidence, you're just playing with numbers. And I would say, okay, you can believe what you want, but it's there. The numbers are there. You can take the surveys of Egypt by Cole, You can take the geodetic surveys. I didn't make those numbers up, or I didn't fudge them. And what you discover is that when you expand it by 43,200, which, you know, if the number was just some arbitrary number, but it turns out that the factor of expansion turns out to be one of the critical sacred numbers within the ancient systems. And so here we have the pyramid now enlarged by 43,200 times. And another way to think of it is if we go back to this diagram right here, you'll see that as the Earth turns, every half second, it's going to turn this far. So it means that every 2 seconds, the Earth, if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds, the Earth has turned 143,200th part of its total orbit. So if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds precisely, the Earth has turned a distance exactly equal to the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. Now you can dismiss that as being coincidence, but the numbers don't lie. They're there. And so when William R. Fix was saying that someone somewhere thousands of years ago was able to measure the Earth with great precision, and I haven't, of course, elaborated upon all the details of this. I'm trying to give you the overall picture of how it might have worked. But see, this is one of those things, again, that if you accept that it's not just a coincidence, it opens up a whole can of worms that mainstream science generally doesn't want to address. Because we're the epitome of scientific evolution right here and now, right? Nobody, before we built satellites, could have measured the Earth to within a couple of 100 feet of its actual dimensions. So, given 2 seconds of time, 143,200th part of the daily rotation, a point on the equator will travel a distance precisely equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base as measured with the socle. In 1/2 second of time, a point on the equator will rotate a distance equal to one side of the base of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle. So here you have a time and space measure integrated into one. The time measure comes in because it's the span of time that the Earth has moved. In 2 seconds, the Earth has turned and moved a distance within a fraction of an inch, being the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. And so the height of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle is 143,200th part of the Earth's polar radius. So therefore, the Great Pyramid is a model of one hemisphere of the Earth at a scale of 1 to 43,200. So if we took the Great Pyramid and we created a duplicate and turned it upside down and put the two together base to base, that would now give us the polar diameter. And there's something else that's beyond the scope of today's talk, which we get into in an actual sacred geometry class. And this is looking how the pyramid is also the solution of the squaring of the circle, the ancient geometry problem of the classical world, the squaring of the circle. And that has very important implications for understanding the Great Pyramid as a three-dimensional map of the Earth. Because the Great Pyramid's square base is to its height exactly in the same relation as the radius of a circle is to the circumference of a circle. So you could picture that what's happening there, that means that in all maps you have a line of constant proportion, a line of where the scale, you know that all maps that you look at, there will be somewhere on the map where you have an accurate scaling, and as you move away from that line of accurate scaling, the maps become distorted. Well, if you've got a square and a circle of equal perimeter, you see, the Earth's equator, think of as the circle, and you think of this pyramid being enlarged 43,200 times, its square base is now the same distance around as the Earth's equator, right? So if you're mapping from the arc, the circular arc that's the Earth's equator, taking that and flattening it out, and now mapping it onto the base of the pyramid, the 43,200 times bigger pyramid, it's going to be exactly the same length. So there's going to be no distortion around the perimeter of the pyramid's base and the height of the pyramid, which is exactly the polar radius of the Earth. So that from standpoint of cartographic information, the particular geometry of the pyramid is very relevant because it is the solution to the squaring of the circle problem, which is something we study extensively in a sacred geometry curriculum.
This next video on the pyramids will begin to show the relationship between 7 and 6. My hope is, you will begin to see a mathematical relationship between the Creator, 7, and the creation, 6. It is a key to understanding prophetic scripture as well as idolatry. You will not get all that or any of that from the video, but it is there. Just enjoy the incredible geometry, and remember, the radius of the circle in the video is 120, that is 60 times 2, and the diameter is of course 240 or 60 times 4.
The ancient pyramids of Egypt have perplexed researchers for centuries. This is not only due to their impressive size, breathtaking beauty, or historical significance. The great curiosity regarding the pyramids stems, for the most part, from their mysterious and enigmatic aura. Despite the extensive research undertaken, many questions remain unanswered. How these edifices were designed, or what their purpose was, remain a mystery to this day. In this video, I will reveal findings that can help clarify one of the open questions. How were the measurements of the 3 pyramids in Giza determined? I offer here a novel explanation with a precise geometric solution for all 3 pyramids, one plan which determines even the interior design of the Great Pyramid. In my research, I examined the dimensions of each base, the sloped sides, the angles and the height of each pyramid, and the interior design of the Great Pyramid. It is my contention that all these measurements are based on the division of a circle with a 120-meter radius into 7 equal parts. To further clarify, I will illustrate the way in which the proposed heptagon corresponds with the dimensions of each pyramid. We start by drawing a circle with a 120-meter radius and divide its circumference into 7 equal parts. We mark the apexes from 1 to 7 and join them all to form a geometric grid of a 7-pointed star, a matrix of a heptagon. We now connect apex 1, 3, and 6 to create a triangle. Its height is 146 meters. The length of each side is 187, the base is 233, and the lateral angle is 51.4 degrees. These dimensions are identical to those of the Great Pyramid of Giza, known as Khop's Pyramid, thought to be constructed some 4,500 years ago. Let us turn the wheel and from this cross point on the vertical axis. We stretch a base to both sides, up to the sides of the heptagon, and join the ends upwards in the center point of the upper side. The height of this triangle is 137 meters, the side is 172, and the base is 208 meters. These are the exact dimensions of the second pyramid of Giza, called Khepra Pyramid. When we proceed and measure one of 7 small marked triangles out, its height is 65 meters, the length of each side is 83 meters, and the base measures 104 meters. These are the exact dimensions of Menkaure Pyramid, the smaller pyramid of the Giza complex. It is now evident that the dimensions of all 3 pyramids were derived from a geometry of a heptagon bordered by a circle with 120 meters radius.
Finally, I want to share with you the purpose of the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the oldest existing remnant of the highly advanced antediluvian human civilization. As I have stated many times in these posts, the world before the flood was, in many ways, more advanced in physics and mathematics than we are today. The Great Pyramid of Giza is undeniable proof. The Great Pyramid of Giza has been reverse engineered and proven to have been a clean energy power plant. Before its degradation, the pyramid would have produced a huge amount of electrical energy, which would have been transmitted wirelessly throughout the region as a free energy source. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, was a primitive attempt at exactly the same type of energy transmission. Sadly, free clean energy is not something the wealthy and powerful of this day and age will allow. If you are interested, you can find the proof originally discovered and published by Christopher Dunn on YouTube or in books he has published in the late 80s. Since then, many engineers have reached similar conclusions. Let's briefly summarize. We see that the God-ordained radius and diameter of the Sun, Moon, and Earth are multiples of 60. We see that the Great Pyramid of Giza is an exact model of the Earth's dimensions on a scale of 1 to 43,200, or 1 to 602 times 6 times 2, whose geometry contains at least 12 mathematical constants, and the dimensions of all three pyramids of Giza can be found from a circle with a diameter of 240 or 60 times 4, divided into 7 equal parts and then joining the apexes of the heptagon. To say this is all coincidence would be unrealistic. Clearly, the relationship between the number 6 to creation is obvious. It is also obvious that the builders of the Great Pyramid of Giza were using base 60 math. It is also obvious that the science involved in the pyramid's design and construction was highly advanced and of antediluvian origin. Finally, the relationship between the numbers 6 and 7 is beginning to become apparent. This brings me to the topic of sacred geometry. From this point forward, I will show you the relationship between base 60 math and the infamous 666. The Urban Dictionary's definition of sacred geometry is the underlying geometry of nature. Nature is the word people use when they don't want to give God the credit he deserves for creation itself, and the divine order that the creation maintains. The origin of the word nature is most likely from the Egyptian word nater, which was their common word for God. It seems to me to be poetic justice that the word people want to substitute for God is actually the word God. As we move into what is called sacred geometry, it is important to note that people are now placing a spiritual value on the geometry observed throughout creation. We are now leaving the purely mathematical and entering into the metaphysical. There are countless websites on this topic. It is indeed a rabbit hole that I have no desire to explore. I add the topic to this post because it is a prime example of how people think there is a secret way to obtain health, wealth, long life, peace, tranquility, happiness, fame, power, etc., without simply kneeling before the God who created all things. The origins of sacred geometry date back at least to the writings of Plato and Pythagoras, probably earlier. In the following 2 paragraphs, I have quoted the website Destination Deluxe as a brief explanation of what people believe. What is sacred geometry? Many teachings have described sacred geometry as the blueprint of creation and the genesis, the origin of all form. Sacred geometry is considered an ancient science that explores and explains the energy patterns that create and unify all things, and reveals the precise way that the energy of creation organizes itself. It is said that every natural pattern of growth or movement comes back to one or more geometric shapes. The molecules of our DNA, the cornea of our eye, snowflakes, flower petals, crystals, a shell, the stars, the galaxy we spiral within, the air we breathe, and all life forms are created out of geometric codes. Here you can see the principal shapes of sacred geometry. All of these geometric figures are based on the number 6, with the 7th figure either being the center of the object or surrounding the object. Again, this reinforces the idea that 6 is the number of the finished creation and 7 signifies the creator. Once you start down the rabbit hole of sacred geometry, you will be exposed to more and more spiritual aspects and delve deeper and deeper into mysticism. It is all a human endeavor to discover the secret to reaching and connecting directly with the spiritual universe. Such is the desire of all secret societies. Freemasonry has 36 degrees, 666. Each degree is a secret rite of passage. The Rosicrucian Order's occult sacred tree of life is the symbol above. The Illuminati promise riches, wealth, fame, and power from the realm of their 666 temple. You get the idea. People align themselves with others with the promise of finding a secret way to fulfill their earthly lives. All cults promise enlightenment, the ability to become more like a god or the god, and the discovery of some hidden truth. Every enticement is a spin on the original temptation in the Garden of Eden, a hidden, forbidden, or secret shortcut to getting what you want. Such is the source of every form of magic. Magic, black or white, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, includes divination, astrology, incantations, alchemy, sorcery, spirit mediation, and necromancy. All of these forms of magic can be traced to the teaching of the fallen angels as detailed in the Book of Enoch. All involve communication with the spirit realm, some are just revelatory information, and others involve invoking action from the spirit realm. If you are involved in any of these things, I urge you to repent. The spirits are not your friends, they hate you and want to use you and finally destroy you. That being said, the number 6 and its multiples are prominent in magic. See, such was the goal of the builders of the Tower of Babel. Once you understand what was going on at the Tower of Babel, everything comes together. Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 through 9, King James Version. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, Go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, Go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men built. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. Jubilees chapter 10 verses 18 through 27. And in the 33rd Jubilee in the first year in the second week, Peleg took to himself a wife, whose name was Lamna, the daughter of Sinaar, and she bore him a son in the 4th year of this week, and he called his name Ro. For he said, Behold, the children of men have become evil through the wicked purpose of building for themselves a city and a tower in the land of Shinar. For they departed from the land of Ararat eastward to Shinar. For in his days they built the city and the tower, saying, Go to, let us ascend thereby into heaven. And they began to build, and in the 4th week they made brick with fire, and the bricks served them for stone, and the clay with which they cemented them together was asphalt, which comes out of the sea, and out of the fountains of water in the land of Shinar. And they built it. 43 years were they building it. Its breadth was 203 bricks, and the height of a brick was the third of one. Its height amounted to 5,433 cubits and 2 palms, and the extent of one wall was 13 stades, and of the other 30 stades. And the Lord our God said unto us, Behold, they are one people, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be withheld from them. Go to, let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech, and they may be dispersed into cities and nations, and one purpose will no longer abide with them till the day of judgment. And the Lord descended, and we descended with him to see the city and the tower which the children of men had built. And he confounded their language, and they no longer understood one another's speech, and they ceased then to build the city and the tower. For this reason the whole land of Shinar is called Babel, because the Lord did there confound all the language of the children of men, and from thence they were dispersed into their cities, each according to his language and his nation. And the Lord sent a mighty wind against the tower, and overthrew it upon the earth, and behold, it was between Ashur and Babylon in the land of Shinar, and they called its name Overthrow. In the 4th week in the 1st year in the beginning thereof, in the 34th Jubilee, were they dispersed from the land of Shinar. Brick for stone and slime for mortar. Let's examine that statement. Nimrod, Ham's grandson, is the one most credited for being the leader of building the city and the tower. Just 2 generations removed from the scientifically and mathematically advanced civilization destroyed in the flood, they clearly want to rebuild the technology. The Stone Age, what our educators want to describe to us as a primitive time in our history, was highly advanced. No need for steel or concrete. They could move, shape, and utilize precision-cut stone to build and power a highly advanced civilization. They understood the utilization of frequency, harmonics, chemistry, energy production, and transmission to the nth degree. We need to realize the knowledge of that past, highly advanced society was brought through the flood in the minds of the survivors, and they taught their children and grandchildren about that society, just as we teach our children today, if we survive such a calamity. They wanted to rebuild the world their parents told them about. But the problem with starting over is they no longer have the tech to cut, move, and shape stone. Their solution: let's make brick for stone. They no longer have the tech for precision cutting, nor the tech to soften stone to make precision fittings. Their solution: let's use slime for mortar. Building a city makes perfect sense, but why build a tower whose top may reach unto heaven as stated in Genesis? Or why build a tower to ascend thereby into heaven as stated in Jubilees? Why a tower? What tech are they trying to reconstruct? These are the grandchildren of the survivors of the flood. What the heck do they need with a tower of all the possible things they could construct? And furthermore, why would God be opposed to it? Some people have proposed that the tower was built in case of another flood. I find that unlikely. First of all, they have a perfectly good ark sitting on top of Mount Ararat that has already proven itself as a viable solution to a flood. If capacity is a concern, just build more arks. The real question is, are they trying to build a power plant like the Pyramid of Giza, or is this a purely religious structure for the purpose of reaching heaven as stated in the scriptures? Most researchers of the tower have agreed that structure was most likely a ziggurat. There are remnants of ziggurats built all over Mesopotamia. The Tower of Babel would have been the first. Here, as an example, is the ziggurat of Ur built around 2000 BCE. According to Jubilees, the base of the Tower of Babel was 13 stades. That is 13 times 606.9 feet, which equals 7,889.7 feet on one side, by 30 stades, which is 30 times 606.9 feet, which equals 18,207 feet on the other side, or in other words measuring roughly 1.5 miles by 3.5 miles. The height was 5,433 cubits and 2 palms, or approximately 8,150 feet, roughly 1.5 miles high. The remnants we have of the tower do not support those numbers, so to me the interpretations are suspect. However, if accurate, the Tower of Babel would have been 3 times taller than Burj Khalifa, currently the tallest building in the world. 43 years under construction. From the dimensions given, you get an appreciation of the scale of the project and the will of the builders. The Akkadian name of the city and tower which we refer to as Babel was Babelim. Babelim in Akkadian means the gate of the gods. Therefore we can conclude that the primary purpose of the tower was a religious one. The city was actually called the City of the Gate of the Gods. The tower was actually called the Tower of the Gate of the Gods. The dwellers of the city would have been the gatekeepers of the city and the Tower of the Gateway to the gods. That would have made them de facto priests of God. Their first goal was to make a name for themselves. That name was to be gatekeepers of the gateway to the gods. Their second goal was to not be scattered throughout the earth. They wanted to be set apart from the rest of the earth, to be special, not common. Again, a man-made priesthood always places itself in an elevated position above the common people. And their final goal was to be able to ascend into the presence of God and descend again at will. As far as the actual technology of the tower, I have little to go on. How they intended to reach heaven or ascend thereby into heaven utilizing the tower is something I can only speculate on at this time. The word ziggurat means pinnacle or mountaintop. The 200 angels who invaded mankind originally came down upon Mount Hermon. This likely spawned the idea that the gods dwell on mountaintops. Mythology is rich with that tradition. Because the plethora of pyramids around the world were likely ancient power sources utilizing the Earth's frequency, harmonics, chemistry, and physics, one could speculate that the enormous structure was intended to produce some kind of amplified wave, but to what end I do not know. The term reach heaven does not necessarily mean physically. We reach each other by phone all the time. However, since they were using man-made bricks and slime for mortar, I find it doubtful that any high-tech purpose was intended. Three things we know for certain. First, their education came from their parents and grandparents. The only education their parents and grandparents would have known came from the world before the flood. Consequently, we see them attempting to rebuild a society based on stone buildings, that is, brick for stone and slime for mortar. Secondly, they truly believe they can reach heaven, where they believe the gods reside, by building an enormous tower. Thirdly, they do not believe they need permission from any god to do what they have the will to do. As I said earlier, sacred geometry, secret societies, mysticism, magic, or building the Tower of Babel, it is all a human endeavor to discover the secret to reaching and connecting directly with the spiritual universe. Here is where it all comes together. What is about to happen at the Tower of Babel will set the world on a collision course with the creature commonly called the Antichrist. The attempt by the second-generation survivors of the flood to establish a priesthood to the gods, worshipped before the flood, is the re-establishment of the idolatry of the pre-flood world into the post-flood world. Those images we now call idols are the images of the fallen angels of the antediluvian world. Let's take a look at that scripture in Revelations one more time. Revelation 13 verse 18, King James Version. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. It could have been any number, except any number would not explain who he is. A name is more than just a moniker. This name is a description of the embodiment of rebellion against God. It started with Adam and Eve. It was helped along by the angels who also rebelled against God, and it culminated with the destruction of mankind in a worldwide flood. But unfortunately, man's rebellion against God did not end there. Here's one thing you really need to understand. God states that his decision to wipe out all human life on earth was because the heart of man was only on evil continually. Mankind had become so ungodly at the time of the flood that there was actually only one man on the entire planet Earth that God did not want to kill. God spared Noah because Noah was a man of faith. Because of Noah's faith, Noah found grace in the sight of God. On the other hand, God spared Noah's family for Noah's sake, not because they were righteous. That is God's character. God had mercy on Noah and let his family live. God will not destroy the righteous with the wicked. This principle is clearly seen in the day before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The conversation God had with Abraham demonstrates that God will spare the wicked for the sake of a few righteous. Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters were spared. In that family, only Lot was a righteous. His wife and daughters were not. Some preachers like to say that now this day and age is comparable to the days of Noah. They had better hope not. The idea that there will be a pre-tribulation rapture is nothing more than a fairy tale. They don't understand the scriptures at all. I will explain everything in my section on what the Bible really says, God willing. Now back to the explanation of why 666 is a reference to base 60 math. The universe and everything in it was created in 6 days. Man, Adam, was created on the 6th day. The physical universe and everything in it, the sun, moon, stars, earth, life on earth, etc., were created using the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Base 60 math works perfectly in the physical universe. Base 60 math was the mathematics of the antediluvian world. Base 60 math was the math that the survivors of the flood taught their offspring. Base 60 math will even survive the coming confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel to those who remain in Mesopotamia. The rest of the survivors that are scattered throughout the earth will eventually adopt another system, mainly base 10, which we use today. God comes down to see what the children of men are doing at Babel. And the Lord our God said unto us, Behold, they are one people, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be withholden from them. Go to let us go down and confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech, and they may be dispersed into cities and nations, and one purpose will no longer abide with them till the day of judgment. God confuses the language of the people so they could not communicate with each other. They break up into smaller groups of people who can understand each other and begin to move apart. The number 666, when viewed through the lens of base 60 math, is like an arrow pointing back to where mankind went wrong after the flood. This was the beginning of the age of the Gentiles, that is, nations. The word Gentile means nation. The man of sin, the Antichrist, appears at the time of the judgment of the Gentiles, referred to in the scripture above as the day of judgment. This is the time of Jacob's trouble spoken of in the Bible. It is the valley of Jehoshaphat spoken of in the Bible. Jehoshaphat means God's judgment, or literally, Yahweh has judged. This is not the end of the world as so many teach. It is not even the end of the Gentiles or the end of individual nations. It is the day of the judgment of the nations for the actions that began at the Tower of Babel. The time of Jacob's trouble, prophetically spoken of in Jeremiah chapter 30, corresponds to the time of the beast and the false prophet, the judgment of the Gentiles, and the beginning of the kingdom of God on the earth. The three events will come to pass in a single generation. I will write a post covering these events in detail, but for now, I will introduce you to a few of the scriptures so you can see the relevance of those events to this post. Jeremiah 30 verses 4 through 7. And these are the words that the Lord spake concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus saith the Lord, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child? Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins, as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness? Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble. But he shall be saved out of it. Matthew 24 verse 7, KJV. For nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Matthew 24 verses 15 through 22, KJV. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Joel 3 verse 2, KJV. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. Joel 3 verses 9 through 16, KJV. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full, the fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem. And the heavens and the earth shall shake, but the Lord will be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel. The city and Tower of Babel are the post-flood revivals of idolatry from the pre-flood world. This can be shown by the subsequent building of ziggurats as temples to idols throughout Mesopotamia. The use of base 60 math in the Mesopotamian world can be proven to have continued for 2,000 years only in Mesopotamia after the confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel. The people who left Mesopotamia eventually adopted base 10 math, and in the case of the Mayans, base 20 math. The age of the Gentiles begins at Babel. Gentiles means nations. After the confusion of language at the Tower of Babel, the people scattered throughout the world and established separate nations. God will allow these nations to go their own way, as he did with the antediluvian world until their evil hearts reach fruition. Man's original sin of wanting to be like God continues to grow until the man of sin is revealed, a man who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. In the next video, I will show the connection of base 60 math to Babylon, and the connection of Babylon to the time of Jacob's trouble, and how the connection between 666 and base 60 math is an arrow pointing straight at Babylon.